and welcome to this week's episode of Experience Shakespeare. I'm Casty Cash, that Shakespeare girl. Every Saturday, we're here taking one tidbit of Shakespeare's history and showing you how it's done and how you can experience Shakespeare for yourself. If you're new here, I encourage you to hit like and subscribe and join us every Saturday for even more Shakespeare. This week, we're taking a look at how to make soap in the 16th century. Like so many things in Tudor England, being clean and keeping your clothes clean was a huge part of showing off your wealth and status, as it was for William Shakespeare. Now, while Shakespeare was living in London, there were shops where you could buy soap in a store, but for the average home, especially in Stratford-upon-Avon, you had to know how to make it yourself, and there was usually someone at the home, like the wife or the staff of the home, that knew how to make soap for that household to use. There were several different methods for using soap and for making it, but today I'm going to show you one 16th century method that you can do yourself. Soap was kind of a big deal in England during Shakespeare's lifetime. It had come over from Spain, and there was this fancy type of soap called Aleppo soap, which was made primarily with olive oil and laurel. Now, these ingredients were very expensive, so naturally the royalty in England thought, oh, this is fantastic, we need to have this. And so they had their own versions of it that the monarchy would use. But being well scented and even carrying what's called a pomander on your person can be seen in portraits of Elizabeth and Mary, where people would carry around ways to make themselves smell nice, because being clean and smelling nice showed off your status and position in society. So for someone like William Shakespeare, who was actively chasing a higher status during most of his life and achieving it, being able to smell nice and keep clean would have been important to the bard. So today we're going to look at how to make a particular kind of 16th century soap that would have been around in Shakespeare's lifetime. Where is soap in Shakespeare's plays? As it turns out, the word soap is never mentioned in Shakespeare's plays or his sonnets, but the word clean is mentioned at least 48 times, including cleanse the foul body of the infected world. That's As You Like It. In Coriolanus, he says, bid them wash their faces and keep their teeth clean. From Henry IV, Part 1, live cleanly as a nobleman should do. All of these references to keeping clean show just briefly how important the idea of cleanliness and bathing and keeping your clothes clean were to people like William Shakespeare. Important cautionary note about making soap at home. This is a recipe you can do at home, but please keep in mind that lye is very dangerous. It is both caustic and poisonous. And what that means is you cannot cook in or eat food that got cooked in any of the pots or wooden spoons or stirring utensils that you use to make the soap. Once you have put lye in it, those pots are no longer good for food. Please hear me about that. Also, lye, as you're making the soap, when it is coagulating and you're stirring it, if any of that splatters out onto your skin while it's cooking, you will get a chemical burn. Lye is very caustic and dangerous. So this method is really for demonstration purposes only, to show you what would have happened in the 16th century. And there are recipes that include it. So I'm going to link in the show notes to both historically accurate recipes from the 16th century, as well as a few fun ways to make soap at home that can look like 16th century soap that maybe isn't quite so dangerous. Particularly if you're making this with kids, you'd probably want to use the non-lye method. And I'll link to that below this video. This method that we're showing you is a 16th century method of making soap. Some of the instruments we're using are not period specific, like Shakespeare would not have had stainless steel, for example, and you're going to see that in the video. So not every instrument we're using is historically accurate, but the method is similar to what they would have done in the 16th century for making soap. For this episode, we'll be showing you how to make 16th century soap the 16th century way. We'll be using ingredients similar to what they had in the 16th century, and we'll be cooking it over a flame like they would have done in the 16th century. We will be using a few modern implements, and obviously we bought ingredients like olive oil and lard at our local grocery store. The first step is to gather your supplies. You will need lye, some kind of fat. We're using a mixture of lard and extra virgin olive oil as a nod to the Aleppo soap that Shakespeare would have seen and heard about during his lifetime. You'll need a dedicated pot strictly for the purpose of making soap, as well as dedicated utensils. You'll need acid test strips, and that is because we're working with lye. You'll need to cook it until alkalinity of the lye is correct. So you'll need acid test strips, any kind of scent, so fragrance oil that you want to add to the soap, as well as molds to put your soap in once it's made. So obviously there are a lot of options for what to do with that. We're going to use one large mold and just make one big soap loaf for this recipe.
So what I'm doing right now is to add the lye to the water. The lye is normally derived from running water through wood ash. This cup has gone from being cold to being very hot, as in I do not want to touch it. The stick itself is showing some damage. We've got steam. But we just need to wait for the lye to completely dissolve and cool down a bit. We don't want to add super hot lye to our soaps and oils.
While we let the lye cool down, we move on to step 2, which is adding the fats to our pot.
The fats could vary depending on what was available. Most households saved lard and tallow. You might get hold of some other types of oils. Olive oil was a really popular one. So today we're actually going to add some olive oil to our soap, but the majority of it is lard.
Whenever they were making this, I guess they had dedicated utensils for the purpose of making soap. You wouldn't use any of these pots then again in the kitchen or elsewhere because the lye just...
You would not want to.
Okay. It would be poisonous to use it for something else?
Yes, because, I mean, see how porous this is? It would hold on to the lye. There are ways of neutralizing lye. Vinegar. In fact, we should probably have some vinegar out here in case we have any splashes. If someone gets splashed with the lye in the process of all of this, and even when I'm done, I'm going to go and rinse my hands with vinegar. Right now we need to go and melt the solids and bring the oil up to temperature. So we're going to walk over to the fire, put this on the fire, and get this started melting. And then we're going to add the lye to it. Now this could be a very all-day process. Traditionally, the women did it. In the homes, the women did it. Now, commercially speaking, because you had plenty of people that were making soap as a commercial venture, they would often be next to the abattoirs where the animals were being slaughtered so that they could have good access to the fats, and then they would turn around, take those fats, and they would make large batches of soap for commercial use and for commercial sale throughout all of London.
You're living out, in Stratford, that's like 3 days travel to the city. It really wasn't practical to go and buy your soap. So this was a skill they had to have.
It was a household skill that people have had for a very long time. If you had sheep, you knew that you had to treat your wool. You had to get the lanolin off the wool. Soap was a way of doing that. If you had laundry that had to be done, typically did use soap. It had so many other uses other than just bathing. It took them a while to figure out that it was really good for bathing. The doctors of the time knew that soap could treat certain skin ailments. So soap was also medicinal. And every family often had their own way of doing it. Every housewife had her favorite way of doing it. So what we want to do now is just kind of bring this. We want everything melted and incorporated. Look at that beautiful green. We've prepared our lye, and we've made sure that the temperature of it has come down to the point where we can touch it. Our oils have warmed up and have dissolved sufficiently. We're going to pour the lye into the pan. And at least for the moment, I want to pull it off the heat, because it does not have to be on the heat to do the whisking. Don't get any of it on you.
Yep.
That is heavily alkaline.
Is that not eating away at the bristles?
Yes, it will.
So would you have to have several of these to make a batch of soap? It would take several of them?
Once we get to the initial emulsification, where it starts turning a lighter color, then we can move to just a spoon. The reason we do a lot of stirring, you're just breaking up the fats and you're breaking up the lye so that they will emulsify and will start the soap making process. It needs heat to create the saponification process. Now that heat can be done simply by allowing it to sit in a warm environment and set up over about 24 hours. That's cold processed soap. Or hot processed soap, which is what they traditionally did through the ages, would be to keep it over the fire at a low heat and continue to stir it. As it bonds, it will come up to a pudding consistency, and then it will start going into a foamy and then into a gel consistency. So we've been cooking this for a while, and it has finally gone through the gel stage where it is turned translucent. And it is now ready for us to mold.
And when would you add like the scents and
Now.
the herbs? Right now, before you pour it into the mold?
Before you pour it into the mold so that they don't cook off. So she's going to add what she wants.
Peppermint. And it doesn't really take a whole lot.
Oh, you can really smell that. Do you have to prepare the mold at all, or you just pour it straight in there?
We're going to pour it straight in.
Would you need to use a metal mold like this, or does it matter what
wood,
kind?
Glass, pottery, it doesn't really matter. But what is important is if it's in a thick container that you cannot warm up, like this one you can warm up a little bit to loosen it, the soap will stick. And you may have trouble turning it out. And by turning it out, I mean taking it out of the mold all in one piece. Now, with this one being metal, all you have to do is warm up the bottom of it in some warm water and you should be able to tap it out. But this needs to sit for a few hours.
And
then we'll turn it out of the mold. And then for family use, you would shave off pieces of it. You might not necessarily have a whole bar. You might just have a few shavings, like for doing the dishes or doing the laundry.
So even though this was a highly time-consuming process, once you had them made, you had a store of soap that would last you for a long time.
Easily for a year, if you made enough of it. Each housewife knew what her household would need. Now, they would import some nice, fine stuff for the ladies, but if they had to, sometime late in the season, if they needed more laundry soap or more household soap, they could make smaller batches. But typically, it would be during the fall when they're killing the hogs, when they had a lot of fat to spare, when they would go ahead and make up a bunch of soap.
And this is something that you can do at home. You don't have to take several days to do it. If you do this in the crock pot and you pour it up, about how long after you've poured it in the mold you wait? 4 hours, and then can you bathe with it, or do you have to wait?
You do not have to wait. I can take the soap that comes directly out of the crock pot. I can check the pH level on it, make sure that it's no longer alkaline, and then I can immediately start cleaning up my kitchen with the residue that is in the pot. I do not have to wait. What I have to wait on is for that thing to cool down. It's already starting to solidify. If I stick this in the freezer, it's going to cool down even faster, and that is okay to do with this type, with a hot process soap. We just need for this to cool down, and once it cools down, we will unmold it, flip it over, we will have a loaf. It will be a very pretty loaf. Anyone in the household who needed a bit of soap can come and shave some off. You could have it on display if it were pretty enough. Some households did. So typically wouldn't take a bar this big into the bathroom. You would slice it up.
Well, thank you very much for showing this to us today. This has been great.
You're welcome.
To learn more about Tudor bathing, you need to check out That Shakespeare Life, episode 45 with Natalie Gruniger. We interview her she's from On the Tudor Trail, the blog. She's also an author on Tudor history herself, and she shares with us some of the history of bathing and the Aleppo soap I mentioned earlier. She talks more about that in that episode. So after you learn how to make soap, if you want to learn more about Tudor bathing, be sure you check out that episode. That's it for this week here at Experience Shakespeare. I'm Casty Cash, that Shakespeare girl, and I hope you learned something new about the bard. This video was made in partnership with the Egilsson Society based in Florence, Alabama. We are grateful to the Egilsson Society for sharing of their time and expertise to teach us something about Shakespeare's history. If you enjoyed this video, please check out the other episode we made with the Egilsson Society on rapier and daggers, which you can watch here. The links to that, as well as how you can get involved with the Egilsson Society and learn Shakespeare's history the hands-on way, all in the link for today's show notes. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next week.